If you are around or in conversations about mental health for much time at all, you'll probably hear the word trauma used relatively often. And if you are in or around conversations at the intersection of mental health and religious life, you'll probably hear the words church trauma or religious trauma used at least as regularly. Those conversations can be really tricky, can be really difficult, and also can be really necessary. Some of the most helpful voices in those conversations, at least that I've come across, aren't even necessarily folks who are trained as therapists or even still working as pastors. Some of the most helpful folks in conversations about church trauma are folks who have experienced it, done the work in their own hearts, their own minds, and with their own communities, and then are speaking back into some of those spaces, not even just correctively, but both correctively and compassionately. A lot of what I've enjoyed and benefited from with regards to Janai Auman's work is that posture. That yes, she's remarkably articulate, and she is abundantly clear about the places lines have been crossed, about the abuse of power in church leadership. She's also speaking from a place of hope. I really enjoyed this conversation with her, and I think you will as well. Check it out. How's your morning so far?
Pretty good, low key. It's actually a really pretty day in Houston, so I'm gonna go for a run later, but.
Fantastic. This is like the one non-rain day we get for the next, I'm not complaining, but this is the one non-rain day we get in the next 5 to 7 days will all be rain, and the last 5 days were rain. We're not used to it, which is why it's disastrous out here right now.
Is it like, I mean, it doesn't flood though. It's just like, oh, it does flood?
Yeah, we're having Northern California is having like massive infrastructural issues, like massive.
Oh, dang. Man, yeah. I never would have thought.
Guess what? Neither did we. And that's why that's part of why it's bad.
Yeah. I mean, in Houston, if you see a gray cloud, everyone's like duck and cover, like dig the trenches, but we get like the sideways rain. Like I feel like in the Pacific Northwest, they get like the consistent pitter patter. Yeah.
It's like a mist, constant mist.
And in Houston, it's like, this is the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Everyone hold on.
God's angry every time it rains in Houston. It's like,
yeah.
Like, what did someone do wrong?
Yeah.
So we're gonna dig in. I'm already recording. We're just gonna chit chat.
Yeah.
And I want to talk to you a little bit about the project you're working on and stuff coming up, but want to set you up so folks kind of acquaint themselves with you. Mm-hmm. You live in Houston, Texas. Mm-hmm. Talk about where you're from. Do you consider yourself a Texan? How big a deal is that for you? For some Texans, it's like 75 to 90% of their personality is like, I'm a Texan. Talk about being from Texas. Talk about where you're from. Like, where are you from? Where's home?
Yeah, I feel like any Texans listening are going to be really upset with me. I feel like I'm the most have we talked about this before? Like, I feel like I'm the most Texan that's ever lived.
Really?
Yeah, I've never been to a rodeo. I've never worn cowboy boots.
Okay.
I hate football, like with a burning passion. Like I just never, and it's so crazy because I grew up in like the, not in Marshall, but like in a very similar, we are Marshall small town. Everything shuts down for Friday night lights. And I just don't, it wasn't. And so I feel like I am the most Texan. And I would say I grew up in a small town called Nederland, Texas, which is near Beaumont and Port Arthur, which are normally in the news for not good reasons. Really close to the Louisiana border by the coast. And I would never say that's where I grew up. I would never say that's home. I haven't been back in a while. But I would say if I went anywhere and introduced myself to someone today, I would say I'm from Houston.
How long have you been in Houston?
Oh gosh, 14 years.
Okay,
so a good chunk of time. But yeah, I would say I am from Texas. I probably wouldn't say that with like loud pride. I'd kind of cower a little bit because I know I'd be coming up against whatever preconceived notions people have of Texas being
Oh yeah,
Texas. But I would say I am Texan. I am the Texan that is willing to bust all the stereotypes type of
fantastic.
Texan. So yeah,
Yes.
but I feel like like Houston is. I love Houston. Houston is also very. It's weird. I would say I spent a considerable chunk of time in the inner city of Houston, which is a place that I feel like I fit in. I kind of belonged to some degree, and now I'm living in the suburbs, which is like almost a totally different beast in and of itself. And I definitely feel like a weirdo in the suburbs. So Houston and Texas in general, it's one of those states where it's been home, but I feel like I have flourished here, not in support of all that Texas has given me, but almost in, it's almost like Texas is the concrete and I have had to learn how to blossom in the cracks of the like concrete, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely. You didn't, fortunately, I mean, you didn't move to Houston for the job, but you eventually took a church job in Houston,
Right. Yeah.
which is sort of like a little bit of a narrative piece here, like it's a bit of an impetus kind of what's the literary device here? It's a literary term. I mean, it's sort of the inciting incident
Inciting
moment
moment.
in your life that springboards you into the work you're doing now.
Yeah.
So let's reverse engineer that. Talk about how would you describe the work you do now?
hmm
And then take us a little bit back to like some of those origin points. What do you do now, and how did that start for you?
Yeah. I think a lot of people would probably categorize what I'm doing now as advocacy work, which it
Okay.
definitely does that and is a part of that. Although I have kind of been more intentional about like, I don't think I'm an advocate. It like
Hmm.
that is the summation of my identity. Really, like I am, what I do is I try to focus on my lane, and my lane being I'm a writer and an artist. And in some of my work, I point to, or in most of my work, I want to point to a beautiful way to show the goodness of Jesus. And in some of that, it's advocacy work
Hmm.
against some of the stuff that I experienced and on church staff, but also kind of that moment was kind of the volcanic eruption moment. There was like the undercurrent of hot lava that had been stewing for a while that I'd never paid attention to before until the volcano erupted. And so I guess I'm kind of adjacent to the world of deconstruction, although that's not a hat that I feel like I wear perfectly either. Um, I feel like I'm sounding very Enneagram 4 with like the rejection of all the labels right now. And but I think it's because I live in between different worlds, and I think I know how to move between the worlds but I've also had to learn like this is what I want to do. I just want to write, and I want to focus on art as a vehicle toward like healing and hope and like beauty. And so yeah, but yes, the volcanic eruption that happened was like my own story within um being on church staff and how that all went sideways. But and I think a lot of this work, it was born out of a hope to like make sense of my faith again.
Yeah.
Like surely not everything I believed was just, smoke and mirror. Like something was real. And so let me try to figure out what was real, and let me lean into that and pursue that, and start putting language to that, without having these outside influences telling me what that thing is. Like I need to start learning what it is to name that myself. And so in naming that myself, I started doing, just writing work on Instagram, just realizing that I interviewed for a job as a writer for another faith-based organization, and they denied my application, or they ultimately rejected me and said that I didn't have as much writing experience. And that kind of brought me to like, well, how do you get writing experience? Like,
Yeah.
who are the gatekeepers to this world? And so I was like, well, I'm just going to do it. And I just started writing it, and it started catching on, and it started resonating with a lot of people. And I realized there's a lot of people who have had, if not the same experience, then similar experiences. And I realized a lot of them are isolated and lonely in some of the same ways that I felt isolated and really alone.
Talk about the experience. When you talk about that shared experience and the thing that you found, you found connection with people predominantly through Instagram, and sharing a little bit of your journey, your story, your experience. Like what was it that people were sharing with you? You were sharing publicly. Like, how were people connecting with you?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, it was an overflow of grief, but not whining. I don't think it was whining. It was more of in the beginning, I started writing. I don't know how I caught onto this idea that like you can write your own Psalms. And I thought, well, I can write my own Psalm. And when you read the Psalms, you like understand like, wow, there's a lot of like loaded emotion in here. And some of them don't resolve, like they don't tidy up. And I realized if David can write this, then I can write my own too. And so I kind of wrote without having to tell everyone the whole story of what happened. I realized poetry and psalms, or even songs it's themselves, can be ways that we give people a slice of our grief or our sadness or our sorrow or our anger. And that is like the connection point. It's not necessarily the specifics of exactly what I went through. But it was this shared grief and realizing that our culture, or American evangelicalism, or Western culture in general, actually has it's really bad at like making space for grief and lament. It's almost like they really want you to kind of, this is so Texas, but pick yourself up by your bootstraps and like get on with it, like get back on the horse. I kind of wanted to explore like, what if whenever I was bucked off the horse, like I was disabled and I couldn't get up anymore? Like, what does God say about that? And so that's kind of where I parked for a while. And from that, I feel like the tentacles of the thing has grown and reached into other areas, like all sorts of things. So spiritual formation. And I feel like I touch on a few different things.
Yeah. A lot. One of the pitfalls, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, is like as soon as we start sharing our story publicly, especially if it has to do with any form of trauma, the line between what's personal, like and what is like helpfully shared publicly, that can be tough to figure out. It can be tough to negotiate.
Yeah.
Like how much, and you and I both talked about this, like, where's the line between like trauma dumping online versus like sharing in a way that, helps other people, providing language for other people. Talk a little bit about your own process and journey there, where you share a significant amount publicly, but you are also a somewhat private person. You're not like you don't do the celebrity thing where like, here's the whole of my life, here's the new dog. You're sharing things publicly that have a lot of attachments to personal, deep pain and trauma and healing. Talk about your journey, like sharing things publicly, finding some boundaries, creating some boundaries, crossing lines. Talk about that process for you.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say first that in everything I try to do it from a very informed, like trauma informed, and trauma sensitive, trauma aware posture. So like my bachelor's is in behavioral health. And so I know that in trauma, or specifically in abuse or abusive relationships, which many people are experiencing in their churches or in even their families of origin, like the number one thing that the way abuse happens is by bulldozing the boundaries. And I realized that my own story could only be my own story when other people in my life had bulldozed my boundaries. And so after my kind of church story went sideways, ultimately I wasn't fired. They never said fired. I feel like I was church fired in that they like find different words that sound better, like they
Yeah.
transition you out. Or actually one of the words, it's funny now, it was not funny then. I was given an informal off ramp. Which I think is just a bananas phrase, but I was church fired. Um, when that happened, I kind of sat in the shock of like, they bulldozed my boundaries, and then all of a sudden there was this huge boundary, like a concrete wall that was just
Mm.
erected between me and my church family. And I realized I went in kind of internal for a while, trying
Mm.
to make sense of the internal world. And I realized to my education actually help me personally in a way of like understanding, okay, this is what happened. I need to figure out where I end as a person and where other people begin. Also,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is helpful, but I'm an Enneagram 2. So
Mm.
like being aware of my needs, being aware of how I need help, like those are things that I don't do well in. And so I
Because
felt
as a
like,
two, your dominant, like, or like false self or early self posture is you subjugate any of your own needs for the
mhm,
benefit of other people. So if you have a need, my needs don't matter. That was a thing you had to recognize about yourself and not undo, but
yeah.
counterbalance.
Yeah, yeah, like not only in being an Enneagram 2, but also in being a biracial woman, a Filipina American in the Texas South. Like my whole life has been self-erasure.
Yeah.
And so I feel like when the church fired incident happened, it was the first time I really acknowledged that like I have been minimizing myself. I need to figure out who I am.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I was really worried about trauma dumping my story. I was also very aware of like, I know that when people share, you can have like a vulnerability hangover. And I was really protective of my capacity. And so I think a lot of my internal process is I share my experience. I don't put words in other people, or I don't want to speak on behalf of like my husband or on behalf of my kids. I can talk about what I see happening within the dynamic of my family, but I also don't want to use their stories as fodder for content on the internet either. I want to be respectful um, of their stories as well. And so I really try to, it's a lot to ask anyone to tell you their story, and it's a lot for anyone to receive a story if they're not like ready to receive it. And so
Yes.
it's really like my hope is what I want to do and what I'm bound, and I think within my limitations I can do this, is like just giving people a slice of, here's a slice of my anger.
Yeah.
I don't want to come off as this angry woman of color that people can easily, but I know my anger is valid.
Yeah.
So I want to give people a slice of the anger. Or I can talk about just a slice of the grief that I experience, and knowing I'm not there right now, but I can recall so clearly where I was. And so normally there's distance between what I'm sharing and when that happened and like when I'm sharing it right now. Like
Yeah.
there's usually space. Um,
And that's necessary. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, super
it's
necessary.
one of the ways we can, and maybe even oftentimes do go wrong, is as stable and secure a human as I might be, and I'm
Hmm.
maybe talking about me now, I don't know, it doesn't really matter, as one might be, if I've just now been hurt, if I've just now been or come to the recognition that I've been getting used or being abused, that initial moment that of recognition or of injury almost is never, that's, you don't want to necessarily ever say never, but like that's just almost never the time to go ahead and publicly process.
Mm-mm.
It's one of the ways we go wrong. We will sometimes want to go to the public to find some form of maybe affirmation that like
Yeah.
I've been hurt, and you can get that if you say something online about the way you've been hurt by an industry, by by the church, you'll find voices to like support that. But it's not particularly wise in the direction of like leading or
Yeah.
helping other people heal. You might feel better for a moment, but you might have also, more to the point, probably just added more trauma
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
world.
yeah. Well, I think some people have started to call it like when you this is, I mean, trauma dumping is such an undelicate phrase, but like some people have started to call it like trauma porn, as if
Yeah.
like it's almost like the, you know, you see a car crash on the highway and it's like rubbernecking to like look, instead of like going about your day, like you spend way too much time kind of on this moment. Um, and I mean, I get that. I totally get it. I think whenever I wanted to share my story, I realized it had to be about where my focus was. And my focus was not so much, and I think I shared this with you, like I no longer write to an audience that has already rejected me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to, and I'm not trying to convince anyone. I realized trying to convince anyone was like crossing my boundaries again. Sometimes when boundaries are quote unquote crossed, it's sometimes not someone crossing your boundaries, it's you crossing your own boundaries and
It's
giving more of
often
your,
that.
yeah. And so I realized I'm not here to convince anyone that
Mm.
this was real. What I can say is like this is real, and reach the other people who want to feel seen or want to feel pursued or want to know like, oh, there's more than just me out there, and telling them they matter. Not convincing or selling or pandering a message to anyone, but like standing in the truth of like, this is my story and it mattered. And it sucked. Like, and
Yeah.
that's real. And I think that's the thing is like people want you to kind of get over it so quickly, but how actually like getting to a place of eventual like reconciliation, forgiveness, peace, rest, like you actually have to work through the grief of the thing.
Yeah.
I was like in kind of the fallout of my story, and I was actually being actively pursued to come to the reconciliation table like a month after everything happened. And I remember telling one of the pastors there, and I said, man, it just feels like my arm was cut off. You're going to need to give me a minute to like grieve what is no longer here. When someone's bleeding out from having their arm chopped off with a machete, the person with the machete doesn't sit there asking like, do you forgive me? Like you pick the person up
Give it
and
a
you go,
second.
yeah, you got to
Yeah.
like triage them and bandage the wound and like let them grieve, like let them, you know, go to therapy to learn how to move in the world without this huge support.
Yep.
And I feel like that's what a lot of like ministry spaces are missing, is just the space to grieve. Not necessarily live in outrage, because I don't think living in outrage is peaceful or restful either, but like actually having outlets for expressing our anger as a method of, or just a form of our grief. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a slow process in what I share. And what I share, I'm an Enneagram 2. What I share is going to be helpful. Like that's my goal.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, some of the story is just for me because it's so funny. I would have said, you know, a few years ago, like that the church was redeeming all of the ache that I felt growing up, when I realized that wasn't true. I realized that wasn't true when we left. And actually, I just kind of plastered over that ache. I really never lamented it.
Wow.
And so when the religious trauma, spiritual abuse stuff kind of came to the surface, everything else beneath it came to the surface too. And I realized there are events that I haven't processed in decades that I need space to process those things. And so it's really kind of just a matter of sharing what is beneficial and good and something I've moved past, and not I don't want to use my readership to make myself feel better.
That's good.
I want to be a light to them in the darkness, whatever darkness that they are in, but I don't want to add to the darkness.
You mentioned a minute ago, you said I'm no longer writing to an audience of people who aren't going to pay attention to me or like don't really want my voice. I don't remember exactly how you phrased it.
Yeah.
You're no longer writing to people who aren't paying attention to you.
No longer convincing someone or selling or pandering.
There really is there's a bit of a grief there because you have to leave a place to and usually there's a you're somewhere you feel like you belong. You recognize you don't belong there anymore. And there's usually a bit of a wilderness moment there before you like have the space to choose and be chosen by people. Man, that third phase there, where we choose and are chosen by people. One of the things that I noticed doesn't get enough airtime when we talk about like the practice of life in Jesus is the yeses that other people gave him in order for the culture around him to form. In other words, like Jesus goes to people and says, "Come follow me," and they still had to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't just quit your job and there was and let's go. They weren't marching orders. It was an invitation to which they then had to say yes and agree to it. Which that the process of, first of all, like risking that as a writer, as a public person, to ask and invite people in, and then to wait for yeses, that can be a little terrifying to like, because you might not get those yeses. But then the difference of like a sense of belonging when you make an invitation and people start to say, yes, I want what you have, and I want to be part of the thing you're doing. It's such a profoundly different experience of communication, of art, of community, when there has been like the actual process of will you, and yes, I will. Talk a little bit about you like developing, I've used the word tribe in the past, or your audience, the people who are paying attention to you. Like, talk about your process, recognizing folks. One of the early conversations you and I had was about like the people who were paying attention to you, that there were particular names. Talk about your process of recognizing like the people you went to and asked, like, will you come with me, and the yeses and the nos. Talk about that process, like up till now for you.
Yeah. Well, I will say, I feel like I need to preemptively speak to that, because going to people and asking for their yes, or more often than not, me saying yes to them, was my default and has been my default. Like, I feel like that is almost like you're asking me to explain to you how I breathe. Like, how do I like become friends with people? You know what I mean? Like, what was pivotal for me to learn was, what does it mean to belong to myself? And not like in a selfish way, but like, if I belong to myself, actually, Brene Brown talks about this in her book, Braving the Wilderness, speaking of wilderness, but she talks about, she encountered like a Maya Angelou quote about like, I can belong anywhere if I belong to myself. And I thought, well, how the hell do you do that? Because my sense of self, I've almost chipped away or given, if I'm a piece of Play-Doh, it's almost like I willingly tell people, and I preemptively give people the piece of Play-Doh and tell them, shape me, form me, do whatever, like make me the person that, that's how I endear myself to people. Like, let me become who you need me to become so that you love me. And I needed to learn to like take the Play-Doh back for myself and like form and shape that, so that I know that I'm the person, like I am going to be proud of who I'm becoming, because I am mitigating who gets to influence me. And so I had to learn what it meant to belong to myself. And in belonging to myself, I could belong anywhere.
That's good.
And so it doesn't matter that, Houston is this concrete city that I feel sometimes like I don't belong in my neighborhood because I feel weird, or because I look weird, or I don't look like the other parents or whatever. But I can belong here because I belong to myself. And so anything else is just kind of free reign. But I think it's particular and tricky with social media, because there is that like that dopamine of getting the likes and stuff like that. And so I realized, if a post does badly, if I don't get a few likes, then it's no big deal, because I belong to myself and I liked what I liked what I post. Like, it doesn't matter if one person likes it. Actually, it's cool that one person liked it. If only one person liked it, then it resonated with them. Like, that one person actually matters. It doesn't matter if 2,000 people like it. And I realized belonging to myself freed me up to invite anyone. And so I think people pick up on that. Like, when they pick up on The please love me, please like what I'm doing, please think I'm funny.
Yeah.
Some people do that they're just so effortlessly funny, and I just want to encourage people, like, your story matters,
Yeah.
and I belong to myself, you can belong to yourself, and you can live in the world freely and inviting other people into that belonging. And when people reject you, that's fine. It just
Yeah.
means they don't get to accept that invitation, and they don't get to partake in your life of thriving either. And so,
It's a clarifying moment when you get a no from either a particular audience or culture, or even from an
yeah,
individual. Instead of that just being a matter of like disappointment and like, oh, what a bummer and what did I do wrong, sometimes, if not oftentimes, that can be a really clarifying moment for them and
yeah,
for you. Like, okay, if that's not my audience, then that helps me know where I actually should be redirecting my energies. It doesn't have
yeah,
to be like I should be able to talk to everyone. You can't talk to everyone. You
yeah.
learn who you can talk to and who wants to say yes to you, in large part because some people say no.
Yeah, yeah. And I realize now, I mean, I've been doing this for a while, and once you beat the same drum with the same beat for a while, people know so they know I'm not going to fly off the handle and start like saying, I don't know, cussing somebody out and like, just getting into the comments and just ripping people apart. That's just not who I am.
Mm-hmm.
My boundaries being where they are means I don't do that. I'm free to not do that.
Yeah.
I'm not in bondage to that. So, but now whenever I am a part of my writing process, it's really just speaking to anyone. A lot of my readership is women. That's just how I think the nature of Instagram is. But I think it speaks to a lot of dudes too. Like, and I try not to use flowery like I'm also not a girly girl. I grew up with a brother and boy cousins, and so I feel like I can reach people. I don't feel like in bondage to my gender, but I feel like whenever I speak or write specifically, it's to the child inside of each and every person
Mm.
who feels like that inner child that feels unseen, unheard, unwelcome. Um, Maybe they're not biracial, maybe they're not an ethnic minority, but a lot of people know what it means to not belong and
Yeah.
to feel othered or to feel outcast and exiled.
Yeah.
And a lot of people know what it is to grieve those things, and
Mm-hmm.
many of them haven't been allowed to grieve. And so it's one of those, I don't want to be your new sensei or your new pastor or your new spiritual director. I just want to give you permission. I kind of want to just throw words out there so that you have words to put to your experience. Because I realized I stopped tail spinning and I stopped kind of swimming in the shame of my experience whenever I could name and put words to my experience. And so I want the same for other people. I don't want them
Yeah.
swimming in shame. And so
That's
let me
good.
give you words. So if this word fits, then like try it on. If that's not the
Mm-hmm.
word that's for you, like I speak about spiritual abuse sometimes. And I know that maybe some people aren't ready to get, a lot of people use the phrase church hurt, which I feel like it's kind of like it's a band-aid for a gushing wound. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just kind of a polite thing, but I know that they might need that phrase to get to wherever they're going. And so I kind of throw words out there and say, like, try these on. If it's for you, that's your word.
Yeah.
I have not trademarked any of these. Like, these are for you. And so, yeah, I feel like I'm speaking to the kid in every single one of us that just wants to know if when Jesus really says, let the children come, does that still mean me?
Yeah.
And it does.
You mentioned deconstruction a minute ago. We've talked about this a little bit. I want you to talk about the difference between deconstruction and the word you used previously. A significant amount was detangling,
Yeah.
and you don't like to align yourself with the deconstructionist movement. You're not like anti.
Mm-mm.
But you use the word detangling to help folks, including yourself, sort of separate like your process from the process of a deconstruction, because not everything is deconstruction. Some things are.
Yeah.
Other things though are other things, and it can be. And one of the things we've shared is like it really is on to talk about overused words and words that help or don't help. The word applying the word deconstruction to every form of rethinking in the religious context is terrible practice. And so you've used the word detangling. Talk about like how did that come up for you, and what's the difference between for you between deconstruction and detangling?
Yeah, and I don't want to, dump on deconstruction, because I think for a lot of people that's their word. I want to respect that that's their word. It didn't seem to fit for me because, number one, I didn't grow up in the church, and so I didn't feel like there was this whole edifice that had been constructed outside of my adult memory that I had to detain. Like, no one forced me into some sort of religious construct. I mean, being in Texas, I feel like I'm kind of rubbing up against that. No matter where you are, no matter what, like there's Southern Baptist churches all over the place, but so it's in the waters that we swim in. But I didn't have like these like when people talk about purity culture, like I wasn't in that. I was just doing my own thing with my own friends in high school. Like, I don't know. I don't even want to tell you what me and my own friends in high school were doing, but we were just like being goobers and like popping fire, like it's just that was purity culture. Just wasn't like getting a ring from my dad, who was agnostic. My dad was like openly antagonistic toward the church. And so a lot of people, what they talk about with their family of origins, like mine is so not that I didn't feel like the ways in which it was being used fit what I was doing.
Yeah.
Like I have kind of grown through, like I was baptized Catholic. We had Buddhas in our house. My mom's Filipino, and so that's just a part of Eastern culture. And I didn't realize until later that having a Buddha in your house in Southeast Texas was weird. And so I felt like I'm pretty open to any number of things. And so whenever I honed in on Jesus and became like a follower of Jesus in my late teens, I was questioning I was open to receiving everything. Almost, I mean, to this point, maybe too open. Again, like I gave the Play-Doh away and told people, make of it what you will.
Yeah.
But I was asking questions. I remember asking people whenever I became a believer, I was like, did the Proverbs 31 woman exist? Because we're talking about her like she exists.
Right.
Like I was asking that question at 18.
Yeah.
And I really realized that a lot of people actually think that she was real. Maybe she was real. I don't think
like a historical person.
Yeah. And I remember actually asking like, so does Moses and the Israelites in Egypt know that Adam and Eve existed? Like asking these weird questions. Like I came to the Bible as a book of stories because I've always been a reader. So I was trying to figure out like, well, how does Adam and Eve connect with David? And like I was asking those questions, and I realize now that a lot of the deconstruction conversation is that people are asking themselves those questions for the first time now
in their 30s.
Yeah. And I was asking them, I was like, how does this book work? Like how do you get from here to here? And so I feel like deconstruction never really fit. I was already I didn't feel like I was in a engendered, or I didn't feel like I was precluded from spaces because of my gender. I was going to ask them in the questions I had because like that's how I was raised. Like I was raised with a strong mom who just like entered spaces with men and like did the work that she needed to do. And so it really wasn't until like I kind of went on staff with our church that I realized, oh, women have a place and they need to be quiet and they need to, and that's actually what kind of got me in trouble, was because I'm always asking questions. I'm always advocating. But I feel like I came to Christ looking for joy and goodness and hope because I was so hopeless at that point in my life. And I realized this is the thing that I want: joy and goodness and hope. I didn't know it was Jesus, or I didn't know that. I thought Jesus was the doorway to all those good things. I didn't realize he was the door to himself, and like he embodies all of those things. And I grasped that, and I realized that. And so whenever the church stuff went sideways, I think I said that before, like I know those things were true. It's just that like a ball of yarn, someone like wrapped all those good things up, and I needed to detangle it. I don't think it was like this edifice or building that I needed to tear down. It was just, I've been here before. I've questioned a lot of things. So I can pull out the questions again. So yeah, I also, I don't know if you've had anyone on to discuss this. I've realized that like deconstruction is a primarily white conversation. I realized deconstruction's not new. Like Black Americans were doing it a while back, like with emancipation and like the God of liberation and deliverance, and how differentiated that is from a God of fundamentalism and all of that stuff. And I realized like maybe that is also why I don't identify, because I'm biracial. And so yeah, I feel like now that if there's a word that I identify with now, it's like decolonizing my faith. But if some people might say that I'm like a deconstruction writer, that's totally fine. I just feel like I do different things, and I am always willing to bust whatever stereotype they have of me and my work.
I value, and your emphasis on helpfulness is not just, it's not just like an Enneagram 2 thing, but you want to be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
You want churches, not just capital C church, but you want churches to be healthy places. You want healing for the church.
Yeah.
For the church, capital C, and for someone's church. For someone who might feel like, hey, and it is more of a feeling, some degree of thought, but just burn it all down. For someone who wants to burn it all down, what makes it worth it? What makes it worth the effort to help or coach religious leaders towards, wiser care? What makes it worth it to try to restore institutions that have been abusive in the past? Like, why is it worth that effort as opposed to the effort of just living without it or burning it down? What makes the church or someone's church worth trying to fix, preserve, restore, and heal?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would definitely say, for one thing, that like there's definitely a time to walk away. Like there are times when people should walk away. Ultimately, that's what I did. I walked away. But to the question of burning it down, I'm like, burn what down? Like you have to name actually what you want to burn down. Some people say that and they actually mean the people. Like they actually want to actively tear down the people. I think that's an expression of grief, and I don't want to police that. But the church itself, like if the bride of Christ, if the church is the bride of Christ, and I think she is, she's supposed to be beautiful. And so I can listen to anyone talk about any sort of theological stance or any sort of theological tradition, but I'm going to ask them what makes it beautiful. Like not what makes you against these other people, but like communicate what's beautiful. And if you can communicate something beautiful about what you're doing and how that reflects on the goodness of a God who provides and who has consistently provided for his people, just no matter how many times humanity has betrayed him, has betrayed one another, has betrayed their relationship to creation, God has always provided. And so like I want to know like what's beautiful about what you believe, and is that like worth saving? And I want to hear that. So I mean, I'll be like, full disclosure, I'm not a part of a local church right now. That's just because I think we're with where we are in our healing process. Like, but that doesn't mean I also want to burn it down either. It's just I'm trying to be mindful about like where we sit for a while in Park. But my hope is that like people, when they express that they want to burn something down, I know that that's just a part of their healing process. I felt that way. I felt like, man, that church just it's a whitewashed tomb. It's got to go. Like, and I know that's an expression of their grief, and they need space. They need safe people to hear that without like policing their grief. But I've realized that once you've healed, like once you're no longer bleeding out, when you've got the scars to show people, to say I live. And I think that's how I write, is like I'm writing from my scars. Like, look, these are the nails that were pierced through my hands. Like I lived through this and I'm being resurrected.
Yeah, that's good.
And my hope is that people know that maybe they're bleeding out right now, or they're still raw, for them to know like it will scar over. And if Christ's resurrection is real, then yours is too. And I believe if that's true of us individually, it's true for us communally.
That's good.
Because Western culture is so hyper individualized. Like we have to think about communal resurrection, like my resurrection is good for the church. Your resurrection is good for the body of Christ. We no longer look like Frankenstein's monster, and we actually look like a bride. And so I think to get there, though, to get to a place where you no longer want to burn it down, you have to work through the grief.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking about forgiveness with another friend, and he said, like forgiveness is good. And I said, yes, but when you've grieved, like the actual wound, and you've moved through that grief, then like you actually have forgiveness in the palm of your hand, like a pearl, because it's no longer forced on you. It's no longer coerced out of you. But when you actually know what it is to grieve, like I no longer grieve what happened to me. I actually grieve for the system that actually puts pastors through what they go through, that helps them to justify the ways that they treat people. Like now I grieve the thing that's hurting them too, even though they don't know it's hurting them. Like it's a whole machine that's pressuring us to behave a certain way and turn a certain way. And when people say, a pastor's job is hard, I 100% believe that. And I grieve that now because the systems we've put in place actually don't support, and they're not helpful for anyone. And we also don't have space for communal lament. And so I think I don't even remember what your original question is, but I'm just kind of riffing. But
it's all right.
Whenever you get through the grief and the forgiveness part,
what makes the church or someone's church worth trying to heal, preserve, fix, restore?
The burning it down is like the anger and the outrage, which is a part of the grief. But once you've moved through it and you've properly grieved, you can see, like, I can look at my former church and now grieve, like it's almost like the end of Moana, where she goes up to the volcano. She's like, this is not who you are.
Yeah.
And I grieve that, like, this is not who you are. This is not how it had to be. And the thing is you don't even see what was wrong, and it's just going to keep happening again and again and again.
Yeah.
And so I grieve that. And so it's not my outrage that calls me to burn it down. There are some times when the SBC report came out in 2022, I think in May of 2022, of like just exactly how many, that was outrageous. And that warranted anger. And that, like, I understand the grief and the lament there. It's the kind of distance from that, of like knowing that there's going to be more reports like that.
Yes, sir.
And I grieve that. I lament that. And the church is far more beautiful. Like, it's because the church is beautiful that we get angry. And so it's really like about, like, if I believe in the Imago Dei in my face, and that I was not I was not deserving of the treatment that I received, I have to understand, like, I have to have a philosophy that extends and invites the Imago Dei in other people. Like, I actually have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And that is what makes the church worth saving, so that I don't become the thing that tore me apart. I don't want to be what happened to me, but on the opposite, on the quote unquote right side. Like, that doesn't actually, that just perpetuates the cycle. And so I think it's a very slow and mindful process, but it's also an acknowledgement of, like, it's not my responsibility to save anyone. It's my responsibility to offer care and hope to people who have none, and hope that one day that they feel like they're in a place to offer care and hope to others too.
I find it a more hopeful and helpful positioning or context for, specifically for anger, that if I'm outraged by something's if I'm outraged by something, that outrage is, at least to some degree, stemming from a hope I have for something better. And the impetus for my outrage, or even the process of grief, like you said, I find it a more hopeful perspective that on the other side of letting myself have my time for anger, letting myself have my time for grief, doing the actual work as long as it takes, that takes its context in not like it's not because it's not that takes into context in a much larger process that is good, is beautiful. So when I have, if insofar as I have a hope for a particular culture, even like a particular microculture, it might be like a legitimate, like specific gathering of people
Yeah.
right around the corner. If I, insofar as I have hope for them, for this thing, and a vision for what health and goodness might look like, it doesn't justify my grief, but there's a different energy that I have
Yeah.
with regards in relationship I have to my own anger and to my own grief, if it's contextualized by hopefulness. It's
Mm-hmm.
I definitely, and we're going to talk about your book project here in a second. I take note at the absence of that context in so much of the public expression and some conversation and diagnosis around what's wrong and what's bad about church. I don't disagree 99% of the 94% of the time. Like, you're not wrong about this. You're not wrong about this. You're not wrong about this. The thing that misses me is the why does it matter? Like, if you're that mad, and you should be that mad, what that says to me is you wish and want for something better. And that might not be church in the same way, but one of the things I resonate with your work is you are working from a vision of this is not only like this could be better, but this is what it might look like for this to be better.
Yeah.
Which leads me to ask you about like the book project you are in now. We will see in the world at some point. What have you written? What are you writing? Tell the people.
Yeah, I'll kind of give it a summary. It's still like in early days, and obviously you know this, like publishing is it's a marathon. Marathon on top of a marathon on top of a marathon that doesn't end. Which I think I appreciate. Like, I appreciate the slow pace of it because it doesn't force you to hustle out and publish something tomorrow. And so the book project is, it kind of, I think I was talking about it with you, like, what does it look like to put a book proposal out in the world, like this time last year. And so now, I don't know when you're releasing this, but I'm actually like under contract with someone, and it looks like we'll be publishing sometime next year in 2024. But the whole idea is how I want to express to people that there is the subtitle, and may or may not change, is how a good God cares for the exile, the outcast, and the marginalized. And how, like, what we're experiencing in this particular cultural moment is not new. And when it's new and you feel like you're the only one, that's really just devastating.
So much harder.
Yeah, it's so much harder because you think, oh, I'm pioneering this, and this is literally my first rodeo, and I don't know what I'm doing. But I realized, and it was whenever I kind of dove back into scripture and seeing the Bible as a story again, I lost that whenever I was on church staff. It was, the Bible was a means to intellectually argue with and kind of like show your theological muscles just within the particular network of churches I was in.
It was a sermon. The Bible becomes a sermon tool. It's an instrument we use to bolster up the messages we're going to give.
Yeah. And not the stories and rich history of stories I know, like stories I've read since I was a kid. And I've resonated with, like, story arcs. And so I went back to the Bible to see that. And I realized, Jesus was abused by people in power, like, and he wasn't the only one. Like, there were like story after story. Like, there is no story in the Bible, no chapter, no book that is untouched by ostracism, by exile, by marginalized people groups, by abuse, by trauma. Like, they're in there. It's just that we've not been trained to see them. Yeah. And not only that, we've actually been trained and discipled to not see that. Like, or it's become a part of our faithful structure to actively marginalize people or create a hierarchy or a patriarchy. Like, this is what the Bible shows us. It's men are at the top and women are just, chopped liver. And so I realized, no, like, it's a story of like how we've, ever since we walked out of the East Gate of Eden, we were a marginalized people wandering. We've persistently been wandering east of Eden for the entirety of our lives.
Good image.
And so the book is about like, how do we come back home? What does home look like? What does it mean to feel like you've been exiled from a community or a home? And how can I build home on earth or heaven on earth? I mean, this is huge in like the South, but like, you know, we're going to go to heaven one day and then the rapture is all going to take us. And so it's about one day, which actually doesn't help me now. Like, no. And so I've realized it was actually through, I think it was Makoto Fujimura's book, Art and Faith, about how like in creating, in making, in writing, in painting, in whatever creative work that we're doing, we actually get to bring heaven on earth and invite people into that and say, hey, look. And it's usually through like your scars. It's through Jesus's scars where he brought heaven on earth and said, like, I'm inviting you into this. I'm actually going to prepare a place for you in my Father's house right now. And he's been doing that. And so how can I do a work and write and show people the stories in the Bible on how to do that, how we're invited into that, how we're included into that. No matter how many times those in power say, no, you've got to get the hell out of here. So the book is kind of all about that and the waters that we're swimming in culturally today. And I think I'm hoping it'll be culturally relevant for a long time. But really my hope is that people just see in the Bible, not a method or a tool that has been used to abuse them with scriptures or the Matthew 18, go to your brother, you know, like I don't want them to see that and have like a trauma response. I want them to know like this book is actually rich and good and beautiful. Like, let me show you how, because I get the trauma responses. Let me show you how I've engaged it again and accepted the invitation. So yeah, that's my hope.
Good. It's my hope as well. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Morning. And we'll at least do this again once we have a book in the world and it's all finished with the cover and the whole nine. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it'll be really fun. This was really fun.
Good. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the At Sea podcast. If you'd like to follow up with Janai, the best way to do that is to jump off from her bio site, which is bio.site site /Janai Auman. And the way you spell that is JenaiAuman. bio.site /Janai Auman. And if you'd like to be one of the folks who helps make this podcast happen, jump to patreon.com /Justin McRoberts. We would love to have you on the team. Until next time.